This is the first in what I plan to have as a series of oversight hearings this committee will undertake on policies involving the National Environmental Policy Act, a law that was enacted 45 years ago before many here were born and hasn't been revised since that time. The focus of today's hearing is the White House Council on Environmental Quality's sweeping draft guidance on greenhouse gas emissions. On its face, the draft guidance acknowledges that it is not legally enforceable. Some may say that means it's unlawful. Despite not being legally enforceable, curiously, CEQ claims that the guidance will facilitate compliance and improve efficiency and consistency of existing NEPA reviews, literally thousands of reviews annually. Based upon the federal government's track record on NEPA, I'm highly dubious, but we'll listen closely to the testimony today for evidence on whether or not that is indeed the case. This draft guidance set the stage for potential sweeping federal overreach by pushing agencies to examine greenhouse gas emissions that are beyond their ability to control or regulate the impacts, including the vast array of all upstream and downstream impacts. Draft guidance is overly broad, it's expansive, it goes outside the scope of NEPA. Otherwise, it's okay. For NEPA to work correctly, federal agencies must be able to affect the outcome of the proposed projects, but the draft guidance goes far beyond what an agency can control. The results will force more delays, more costs onto economic and energy-related activities nationwide, and uncertainty for those who want to balance the needs important to all Americans with protecting the environment. The draft guidance would even frustrate the administration's other goals, such as modernizing the nation's electric grid to improve energy reliability and resiliency. The trend for this administration seems to be that the end justifies the means, regardless of whether the law allows it. This draft guidance is the latest case in point. CEQ states as a fact that, quote, many agency NEPA analyses have concluded that greenhouse gas emissions from an individual agency action will have small, if any, potential climate change effects. Government action occurs incrementally, program by program, and step by step, and climate impacts are not attributable to any single action, but are exacerbated by a series of smaller decisions, including decisions made by the government. Even though they say that, CEQ then concludes that being a small impact is not a good enough reason not to consider everything that could possibly impact any climate change in any NEPA analysis. Federal agencies have jurisdictional limits. They cannot go possibly consider the entire range of climate impacts. They cannot turn the right page and still possibly consider, that's why we don't write these things out, possibly consider the entire range of climate impacts of things outside their jurisdiction under existing NEPA guidelines. CEQ acknowledges the limits of the guidance when it says this guidance is not a rule or regulation, does not change or substitute for any law, regulation, or other legally binding requirement, is not legally enforceable, and does not establish legally binding requirements in and of itself. Which begs the question, then why do it? Clearly, for an administration that advocates climate change policies as more pressing than national security threats, the answer is regardless of its enforceability, the end justifies the means. They could not get the cap and trade passed by Congress, so now they address climate change by forcing it through the NEPA process by unlawful guidance. CEQ is bound by the statutes. Therefore, any environmental review conducted by an agency is bound by the statutorily prescribed mission and jurisdictional limits of the permitting agency. In the absence of congressional action to expand the scope of the environmental review for federal agencies by expanding their jurisdiction, agencies, including CEQ, are stuck with the recognition that greenhouse gas emissions from an individual federal agency action will have small, if any, potential climate change effects. Numerous and exhaustive NEPA analyses agree, and imposing hugely costly and lengthy new analyses will not change that. With that, I kind of look forward to the hearing from our witnesses today and hope that the Obama administration will recognize this guidance should be withdrawn.